is the best player, big body Brunson. Karl Anthony Towns is the most important player, but OG Anunoby is the X factor. And the New York Knicks are not making it out of the East without OG Anunoby being healthy. And to be honest with you, with OG Anunoby and the way he's been playing of this entire postseason, one could argue that the Knicks can win it all. I said it last week, and I really stand on that and believe that.
For years, the conversation around OG Anunoby sounded almost exactly the same. Great defender, reliable role player, overpaid, too quiet, injury concerns, limited offensive game, a player who could help a team win but never truly become one of its driving forces. When he signed his massive contract, critics wasted no time questioning it. Some called it one of the riskiest deals in basketball. Others argued New York had committed superstar money to a player who had never consistently produced like one. Now, that conversation looks very different. Before we get into it, if you love basketball and you're one of the many people watching without subscribing, make sure to join the channel. We're covering the biggest NBA stories, playoff battles, player breakdowns, and everything happening around the league. So hit subscribe and let's get into it. Because this postseason has completely changed the way people look at OG Anunoby. The player many viewed as a defensive specialist has suddenly become far more than that. He is scoring, creating momentum-changing plays, and delivering performances that do not look anything like those of a typical third option. On a team filled with talent and big personalities, Anunoby has become one of the most important reasons New York finds itself on the biggest stage in basketball. But to understand how he got here, you have to go back to where it all started. The story does not begin in New York. It begins thousands of miles away. Born in London and later raised in Missouri, Anunoby grew up far from the basketball spotlight that often surrounds future NBA stars. He was not one of those highly publicized prospects whose highlights dominated social media. He was not entering college with superstar expectations attached to his name. Instead, he arrived at Indiana as a raw athlete with intriguing physical tools and plenty of room to develop. Then came the 2017 NBA Draft. Anunoby was selected 23rd overall, a spot where teams are typically searching for value rather than future franchise players. Those picks are often viewed as opportunities to find contributors, not stars. The expectations were modest. If he became a reliable rotation player, most organizations would have considered that a success. And early in his career, that is exactly how the league viewed him. His defensive potential immediately stood out. At roughly 6'7" with an enormous wingspan, he possessed the size, strength, and versatility to guard multiple positions. He could switch onto guards, battle larger forwards, and make life difficult for elite scorers. Defensively, he looked special almost from day one. Offensively, however, the role was simple. Space the floor, stand in the corner, hit open threes, defend at a high level, do not overcomplicate things. He became known as a player valued more for what he could stop than what he could create. Then, just as his career seemed to be building momentum, fate delivered a brutal setback. During Toronto's championship season, Anunoby watched his team make a historic playoff run. He earned a championship ring, but he never got the chance to participate in the journey. An emergency surgery forced him to miss the entire postseason, turning what should have been a career-defining moment into one of the most frustrating experiences of his young career. While Toronto marched toward a championship, OG Anunoby could only watch. His teammates were making playoff memories, winning massive games, and building a legacy that would be remembered forever. Meanwhile, he sat on the bench in street clothes, close enough to experience the atmosphere, but unable to step onto the floor and contribute. He received the championship ring, but he never got the opportunity to earn it in the way every competitor dreams of earning one. That experience mattered more than most people realized. For many players, missing a title run would simply become an unfortunate chapter in their career. For Anunoby, it became part of the story that followed him. As the years passed, the perception around him became increasingly clear. He was respected but rarely celebrated. Coaches loved him, teammates valued him, opponents certainly noticed him, but he was viewed as a supporting piece rather than a centerpiece. The labels came quickly: reliable, versatile, defensive specialist, glue guy, winning player. Those descriptions were positive, but they also came with limits. They implied that Anunoby could help a team succeed, but not lead it. He was often viewed as someone who complemented stars rather than someone who could become one. Then everything changed. A blockbuster trade sent him to New York, one of the biggest basketball stages in the world. Suddenly, the quiet, low-profile wing was no longer operating away from the spotlight. Every game was under a microscope. Every performance became a talking point. The expectations grew overnight, and so did the criticism. Then came the contract. contract. 5 years, more than $200 million. The reaction was immediate. Many fans and analysts looked at the number and questioned how a player with Anunoby's offensive reputation could command that kind of money. Critics argued that teams do not typically hand contracts like that to players known primarily for defense and spot-up shooting. The deal quickly became one of the most debated moves in basketball, and once the criticism started, it spread everywhere. Every roster decision became connected to his contract. Every player the team could not retain was linked back to his salary. Every injury reignited the conversation. That last part was especially important because, fair or not, Anunoby's health history became one of the biggest talking points surrounding him. Throughout his career, he had dealt with various injuries that limited his availability at different times. Whenever he missed games, the questions returned. Could he stay healthy enough to justify the investment? Could he consistently be on the floor when it mattered most? Then there was the criticism of his offensive game. Playing alongside high-usage stars often meant fewer opportunities. There were nights where he barely touched the ball, games where he spent long stretches spacing the floor and waiting for chances to come his way. When the shots fell, people praised his efficiency. When they did not, critics argued he disappeared too easily. For years, those narratives followed him everywhere, and that is exactly why what happened next became so surprising, because the player many people viewed as a supporting actor suddenly started forcing his way into the center of the story. That was the perception surrounding OG Anunoby. When his shot was falling, people appreciated what he brought to the floor. When it was not, he often faded into the background of the conversation. He could spend an entire night making life miserable for an opposing star, disrupting possessions, forcing difficult shots, and controlling the defensive side of the game, yet somehow the focus would still shift elsewhere. That is the reality for players who do most of their work away from the spotlight. The attention naturally goes to the scores. It goes to the players taking the final shots, posting huge numbers, and filling highlight reels. Meanwhile, players like Anunoby often get defined by what they are not rather than what they are. He was viewed as a third option, sometimes even a fourth option, earning the kind of salary usually associated with franchise cornerstones. At least, that was the narrative. Then came a season that was supposed to settle the debate once and for all. The organization made major changes. A new coaching staff arrived. The roster evolved. Expectations rose. Everything pointed toward a fresh start and a chance to prove that the investment in Anunoby was the right one. Instead, the same questions kept coming. His regular season numbers were solid. He averaged 16.7 points, 5.3 rebounds, and 2.2 assists per game. Those are valuable contributions for almost any team in the league. But for critics focused on his contract, those numbers only strengthened their argument. They looked at the production and saw a player who had not made the offensive leap many expected. To them, he was still a high-level role player being paid like something more. As the season progressed, those conversations only grew louder. Whenever the team struggled, Anunoby's contract became a target. Analysts debated whether it made sense to devote so much money to a player who was not the primary offensive option. Fans questioned whether a championship contender should allocate that much salary to someone whose value was often difficult to measure through traditional statistics. Then came an achievement that should have silenced at least some of the criticism. Anunoby earned a spot on the NBA All-Defensive Second Team, recognition that placed him among the league's best defenders. Even his coach publicly argued that he deserved stronger consideration for an even higher honor. It should have been viewed as validation. Instead, many critics used it as confirmation of what they already believed. To them, the award reinforced the idea that Anunoby was just a defender, a specialist, an elite stopper who excelled in one area but lacked the offensive impact expected from a player with his contract. The label became even more rigid. Great defender, limited creator, valuable player, overpaid contract, useful piece, not a star. By the time the regular season ended, many people thought they already knew exactly who OG Anunoby was. The verdict felt final. The debate seemed settled. Then the playoffs arrived, and everything started to change. By the end of the regular season, it felt like the basketball world had already made up its mind about OG Anunoby. The ceiling had been defined. The narrative was set. He was viewed as a high-level defender, a dependable complementary piece, and a player whose offensive game had likely reached its limit. The numbers seemed to support that argument. He averaged 16.7 points per game, played excellent defense, and filled an important role. But for many critics, that was all he would ever be. The problem with that kind of thinking is that players do not always develop in a straight line. Sometimes the biggest leap comes when the pressure is highest. Then the playoffs started, and suddenly the player many people viewed as a supporting actor became one of the most impactful performers in the entire postseason. season. What makes this transformation so fascinating is that Anunoby did not completely reinvent himself. He did not become a different player overnight. Instead, he started showing dimensions of his game that had rarely been featured before. The skills were there. The opportunity finally arrived. The numbers tell the story. During the regular season, he averaged 16.7 points per game. In the playoffs, that number jumped to nearly 20 points per night. His rebounding climbed significantly as well, rising from 5.3 rebounds to almost 7 per game. That alone represents a major increase in production, but the efficiency is what truly stands out. Anunoby has been shooting an incredible 57.7% from the field and 48.3% from three-point range during this postseason run. For a player who was already considered a strong shooter, that leap is remarkable. Against the toughest competition of the year in the most important games of the season, he has become even more efficient. Those are not the numbers people normally associate with a role player, and while the offense has improved dramatically, the defense has never disappeared. He continues to guard elite perimeter scorers on a nightly basis. He is averaging steals, protecting possessions, and making life difficult for some of the best offensive players in basketball. The responsibilities that built his reputation are still there. The difference is that now he is doing much more than that, and perhaps the most impressive part is the role he is doing it in. Anunoby is not the primary offensive option. He is not dominating the ball every possession. The offense is not built entirely around him. He is still operating alongside other stars and still sharing touches. Yet somehow, he is producing at a level that looks far bigger than a traditional third option. That is why the conversation around him has changed so dramatically. The player many people viewed as a complementary piece is suddenly posting numbers, efficiency, and two-way impact that resemble those of a franchise centerpiece. And once that starts happening on the biggest stage, comparisons begin to appear that nobody would have considered just a few months earlier. When people talk about championship teams, the conversation almost always centers around superstars, the names that dominate headlines, sell jerseys, and take the final shot. But every so often, a player forces his way into a different kind of conversation, the conversation reserved for elite two-way wings, the players who impact every possession and quietly decide who wins and who goes home. That is exactly what OG Anunoby has done during this playoff run. New York did not just survive the Eastern Conference, they tore through it. They beat elite teams, controlled series, and reached a stage that many Knicks fans had never experienced in their lifetime. For a franchise that had spent decades chasing this moment, Anunoby became one of the biggest reasons it finally happened. Think about where the conversation was just a few months ago. Overpaid, injury-prone, limited offensively, great defender, but nothing more. Those labels followed him everywhere. Every contract discussion, every injury update, every quiet offensive night. Critics pointed to them as proof that his ceiling had already been reached. Now those same conversations look completely different. The contract that was once mocked suddenly looks a lot more reasonable when viewed through the lens of winning basketball. The offensive limitations people focused on have been overshadowed by elite efficiency and timely scoring. The player many believed had plateaued has delivered the most complete stretch of basketball of his career on the biggest stage possible. What makes this story so fascinating is that Anunoby did not transform into somebody else. He did not suddenly become a completely different player. He remained the same disciplined defender, the same physical wing, the same player willing to do the little things that rarely make headlines. The difference is that now the entire package is being displayed at once, and the rest of the league is finally seeing its full value. That may be the most important lesson from this run. For years, people wanted OG to become something louder, something flashier, something easier to market. Instead, he stayed true to the game that got him here, and now it is paying off in the biggest possible way. Before you go, if you're enjoying these NBA stories, playoff breakdowns, and player deep dives, make sure to subscribe and join the channel. There are plenty more basketball stories coming and you won't want to miss them, because the reality is simple. The player many people ignored has become impossible to ignore. The former late first-round pick who watched a championship run from the bench is now chasing another title as one of the most important players on the floor. And that leaves one fascinating question. Has OG Anunoby gone from being one of the most criticized contracts in basketball to one of the most underrated players in the entire league?